everyone, Sidewin here, and today I'm going to be talking about the Warpriest at level 2. I'm expanding on my first video, which only covered level 1. So, the base statistic changes are first, the Warpriest gains 1 additional spell slot and 8 additional hit points. There's nothing else special about this, so don't obsess over it. Now, the special thing, and the thing that will take the most time, like I've said, is the different class feats. So at second level, all clerics gain a class feat. I'm going to summarize one per slide. This video will not cover any setting-specific or deity-specific feats, because there are like 6 of those, and they're very specific to certain builds, so I'm going to just skip over them here. So the first one is Deadly Simplicity. Essentially, this gives martial damage with a simple weapon when that weapon is your deity's favored weapon. This can be useful for allowing flavor-based uses. Paizo is very good at providing this. And it's a feat to consider if your Warpriest seems to be hitting a lot in melee, because by level 2, you'll know what you're doing a lot, at least to an extent. And you can build off that. So this one's simple. I'm going to go to the next one. Divine Castigation allows you to sanctify or desecrate, depending on whether your deity is like sanctified or desecrated, your heal and harm spells. This allows you to deal spirit damage to enemies which are the opposite, basically a desecrated enemy when you're sanctified. This can be useful in any campaign which focuses on enemies which would be vulnerable to this. So for instance, if your deity is Iomedaea and you want to damage fiends, you can sanctify your heal spells to deal harm to them in addition to dealing damage to undead. Undead are not affected by this, just to be clear. They're already harmed by healed and healed by harm. That's very important to remember throughout this. Next feat, Domain Initiate. You gain a domain and you are granted a focus spell. The usefulness of this feat varies very widely based off what domain you pick and what deity you have. I'm not covering those here. That would earn its own video because there are over 20 different domains, and each one gives a different benefit. So this one you have to think about based off your own character, and if it would fit, take it. But it will vary in usefulness depending on deity and depending on the cleric. Be aware of that before you just grab this and don't realize what you're getting. Then Healing Hands or Harming Hands, depending on whether you have a heal font or a harm font, is really simple. It increases your die by 1 step. It gives you a D10 rather than a D8, increasing the average number by 1. This is just due to the probability of rolling a certain number on a dice. If you really do not have another thing you want to pick and you heal a lot, you might just grab this so that it's there. And note that if you have a versatile font, which is another feat, this will apply to both, but that's a higher level thing. So, Premonition of Avoidance. This is a reaction, which by default a cleric doesn't have. This feat could be useful if you want to add a reaction. It gives +2 to the triggering save. So, whenever you're provoked by a hazard, you get +2 to the save. Note this is a very niche feat because it only applies to saving throws against hazards. And hazards are a particular type of stat block on the GM side of it. So be careful when picking this one. Now, if you know your GM likes to give lots and lots of hazards, this could be a good pick. But it is more dungeoneering focused and niche. Basically, think before you take this one as well. It's not actually going to help with most saving throws triggered in combat. It's only against hazards. Reach Spell is another very simple feat which can be very important for certain characters. You spend 1 action with Reach Spell, and your next action, if it is casting a spell, has an extra 30 feet of range. The main use I can see for this is for heal harm spells, so that you can heal your allies at a distance. Note that this is probably far more useful for cloistered clerics, because cloistered clerics do not get armor. and they cannot really fight. So they want to have that ability to stay out of combat. Whereas a Warpriest might want this if their party is very, very mixed. So if you're in melee and you're with a fighter who's in melee, you can heal the fighter without needing this. Now, if you want to heal, say, a wizard who's staying way in the back, you can use this feat to be able to heal that wizard. That's the main use for Warpriest. Now, if you're in a dungeon, this is somewhat less useful. So if you're constantly in very close, cramped quarters, like certain Pathfinder adventure paths are infamous for being, the spell might have slightly less utility. However, if you have a couple of squishy ranged characters who stay far back, you can consider this if you're going to be healing. This next one is Splinter Faith. This is probably one of the more complicated feats, and it is Legacy. So essentially, this lets you choose your deity's domains. 3 of the chosen domains must already be on the deity's main or alternate list. Number 4 can be one that's not on the list. Note that this is like all domains, so I'm not going into super deep depth here, just because there's so many. Now, an important note here is any domain spell provided by a domain which is not on the deity's original list. If you have a deity who has the domains of, say, protection, life, and water, and you want to add, say, fire to that list, fire, you will cast all granted domain spells at 1 level lower. This also, note, this is not really applying at level 2, but it removes access to anything based on the original domains. You are not getting around like that. This is not an exploit. So, Syncretism. This is another legacy feat. It allows you to have a second deity, and you have access to that deity's favored weapon. I personally think for the Warpriest, this is more flavor-based, but it could be very useful if, say, you really are stuck on your character following a certain deity, but also following another. In this case, this is how you do this. You can also take this one at level 1 using human, and I believe the feat's called Natural Ambition. And all feats which you have, which apply to your old favored weapon, also apply to the new one gained from the new deity. That's how syncretism works. And I'll avoid going into a long rant on what syncretism actually is in religion. Might do that in the future. So, Cantrip expansion. This feat just gives you 2 new cantrips off the divine spell list. It just gives you more cantrips. So if you really, really want certain cantrips, you could pick this. It's also a good generic pick if you don't really want anything else, but just want to pick one, because it lets you have more of what the cleric already has. Communal healing lets you heal additional creatures. This works only on heal spells and only works on living creatures. When you cast a heal spell, once you have communal healing, you can also heal yourself or another creature a number of hit points equal to the spell's rank. At level 2, you only have first level spells, so this only heals 1 hit point. At higher levels, this can heal up to 9 hit points based off the level of a spell slot. So if you're very, very high level, it gives far more. This only applies to living creatures. Just going to reiterate that it does not apply on Dampier, skeletons, or any other undead party members. It also only works with the heal spell, so you cannot use harm and help them that way. So if you've got a party which is majority undead, if you're the only living party member, do not take this feat at all. Then Emblazon armament. You spend 10 minutes to empower a shield or a weapon. It gives +1 damage to the weapon or +1 hardness to the shield. It will act as essentially a spell focus. You can only do it to 1 item at a time, and the bonus is to damage, not a bonus to attack. And I can see how someone could get mixed up reading the text. It only gives +1 damage. So the way that works is you roll your d20 to hit, you add all the bonuses already there, and then if you do hit, you roll the die for damage, and then add strength, and then add +1. Hardness can be more useful for a shield, potentially, because it gives more, essentially, hit points to the shield. And note, you can give this to someone else if they follow the same deity. So if you are a cleric of one deity, and there's a champion in the party who's a paladin of the same deity, that paladin can use your shield. But if you want to give it to, say, a fighter who follows a deity diametrically opposed to your own, or just any other deity in general, you can't give him the shield with the benefit. It'll just be a mundane shield for him or her. Doesn't matter. So that's its main limitation. This one could also be a good generic one if you're in melee and using a shield a lot. Then Panic the Dead. This one is essentially, it buffs your heal spell by making it do more damage to undead. So whenever you harm undead, dealing damage by using the heal spell, the undead is forced to save against you. If they fail the save, they are given Frightened 1, which is a debuff. And on a critical failure, 10 below your spell DC, they are forced to flee. Note, one special thing about this is that it applies to mindless undead. Usually mental effects like Frightened can't be applied to mindless undead, but this feat does. Note, this also only happens with heal, so you're not going to be able to use harm on, say, a living creature and have this happen. Then, Rapid Response. This one is potentially very useful for a Warpriest. Essentially, it gives you a reaction, which is something a cleric does not already have. To reiterate that, it's triggered whenever an ally hits 0 hit points. It allows you to immediately stride, and your speed is increased by 10 foot, which is 2 squares on a battle map, whenever you do this. This can be very useful to reach a dying ally and immediately heal or harm, if it's undead, that ally. Note that if you get them within the 1 round, if I remember correctly, the dying condition and the wounded condition might not be applied. Then Sap Life. This is essentially the version of communal healing for the evil cleric. It does not work for heal, and it does not apply to others. Whenever you use harm against a living creature and deal damage, this feat gives you hit points equal to the spell's level. So at level 2, this is still only a level 1 spell. So still only 1 hit point. And since it's saying deal damage, if you heal an undead ally, it doesn't give you the benefit. Because you healed. You didn't deal damage. And this feat only gives this benefit if your character is a living character. So if your character is a Dampier, this feat is completely worthless. Same thing for a skeleton. Don't take it if you're one of those. It literally does nothing. And honestly, I don't think it's a very cool feat in general. Then, Versatile Font. This is a feat which I have a affection for if you have a party which is mixed in both living and undead. It allows your Divine Font spell slots to be either heal or harm. This can only be taken if your deity has both heal and harm fonts. If your deity only has one, you cannot take this feat. It could also be useful if you end up using harm spell a lot just because you like it. It gives you additional options. Although from my reading of it, of the actual feat text, you have to pre-prepare which spell is in which slot. So you do not get to choose on the fly. If you have a party which has, say, 2 undead characters, 2 living characters, and then you might consider taking this, especially if the undead characters are your melee characters. Because they're going to be taking hits, and by default, you have to prepare harm in your own slots. This gives you the divine slots once, which means that you can do more there. This last feat is more useful at higher levels. It's called Warpriest Armor, and it is a feat which is unique to the Warpriest subclass. It grants you heavy armor proficiency when you gain expert proficiency in medium armor. From what I could tell, this is at 13th level, so you're not going to have heavy armor until you're level 13, which can be quite a long ways off. Like if you assume 4 sessions per level, and you're level 2, that's 4 sessions to level 3. And then you have 10 more levels. So you have around 44 sessions before you get there. The other benefit of this is a smaller rider benefit, which makes it so that armor of 2 bulk or higher only counts as being 1 bulk. Again, this mostly applies to heavy armor. From what I've seen, there isn't really much medium armor that has 2 bulk. But if you are using one of those, and you have low strength, which is also probably not a good idea for Warpriest, it could maybe make sense at a lower level. However, this is mainly an upper level feat from what I can tell. It just is unlocked at level 2. So that is all of the feats for level 2 for the Cleric in Pathfinder Second Edition. Many of these feats are level 1 feats, meaning that you can get them at level 1 if you are a human and use the Natural Ambition feat. That is all for today. If you have any question or comment, please ask below, and I will see you in the future.